Well, hello, good folks. Today we're going to be starting on a new project. This is really just a tuning up project, but I think that it's necessary. So I bought a Nakamichi System 1, very rare system with the nice rack and everything. Everything is working to a degree. So the amplifier is working good. The tape deck was recently gone through. That's the Nakamichi 600. The amp, I think, is the 620. And this is the 630, which is the preamp from that rack. So I've taken it out of the rack to make it easier to work on. And so this is the only unit that had some issues, and it was working. It was actually sounding very, very good, but the controls were noisy, and the FM portion, when it came to tuning, some of the LEDs here in the tuning dial are not LEDs, I believe incandescent lights from that era, are burnt out. So I've got a number of replacement bulbs. Hopefully I've got the right ones. And so we're going to try and swap those out. We're going to clean up the controls, make sure all the switches are put deoxit on the switches and fader lube on the pots. And we're going to go through, because there's some crackling and popping, especially when it first turns on and you turn the volume up. One would maybe assume that it was the volume pot, but it just seemed to be not, staticky from the pot itself. It just seemed like there was some issues going on. So it might be some noisy transistors. Could also be bad capacitors or ones that are way out of tolerance and time to change or whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up. I'm going to clean everything out, replace any of the bulbs, have a look at I've got the parts list here, and I've got a list of known problematic transistors. So I'm going to compare the transistors that are in this is just an excerpt out of the service manual. I've got the full service manual on a laptop. Just wanted to save some paper and just print out the parts that I needed. Basically how to disassemble this, and also the circuit boards and the lists of all of the transistors and capacitors that are on it. So I think depending on how tough it is to get at some of the boards and everything, I do have a whole bunch of cap kits, Nichicon cap kits and everything. So hoping I have the right sizes in hand. We're going to go through, pull a bunch of capacitors, just sort of get a feel for whether they're out to lunch. I mean, this is a mid-70s preamplifier, highly regarded, really freaking sounds good, but again, when I'm changing things on it, that's when some of the issues sort of crop up. So we're going to go through this and hopefully give it a good little refresh and make it live for another 30 years or so. Now, where my limitations are at is I don't have all the test gear, and I certainly don't have the knowledge of the FM portion. When the other part of the issue here is, if I'm on mono mode, which is left plus right combination, I can zone in on a station and it comes in good. I'm in the basement. I use rabbit ears, but I still am able to get one of the local strong stations, and it'll lock on and stay without drifting or whatever. As soon as I go on to mono mode or stereo mode, the right channel is way down, which might indicate bad caps or whatever, and it sort of drifts in and out, and doesn't sort of stay on stations, and the volume goes up, comes back down. So I don't have all of the test gear needed to tune up an FM tuner, but I'm going to do the low-hanging fruit, see if maybe some transistors are problematic and caps, see what I can do there. I don't really listen to FM much, but I would much rather have the piece working than partially working. So really this is two devices in one. It's a FM tuner and a preamp. I'll probably use the preamp the most, but it would be nice to get the FM tuner working properly. And if it comes to it, I may just take it to a local tech friend of mine to do that phase of it if need be. So yeah, um, looking forward to cracking into this thing. We'll film it and do explanations and go hyperlapse just so you can see the sort of sequence of what I'm doing here, and hopefully you'll get something out of it. It's a rare piece, so it's probably not as going to be not as popular a video, given that there's not many of these things out there. But compared to the Pioneer receivers that I've done, and the Yamaha receivers, and the quad equipment, and Nakamichi tape decks that I've rebelted and stuff. But nevertheless, this might be an interesting piece for folks to look at and just see how well these things were manufactured back in the day. But when it's playing nice, it really sounds good. So I've got a demo video that I can link to in the comments below. That when I first received it and put it through its paces, you can watch that and see sort of the before, and then maybe we'll shoot an after video once I've completed, and if I'm successful. So more to follow. All right, I just realized I forgot to start filming. Anyway, so I'll tell you the progress I've had so far, which was, so you saw me taking the back piece off. There's 2 bolts here, 2 bolts on the other side, and that hold on the handles here, and that pops out, and then in here is the little light connection for the display lights for the tuning section up here, which I had to disconnect. So it's got a little tether here. You have to disconnect that before you can actually take the faceplate off. And then what we'll do is I'll put my camera back on the tripod and we'll pick up the hyperlapse from there. So it's quite easy to take this off. It's just accessing these to get the so that one of the issues is the burnt out lights. So having to disassemble this assembly to get the lights replaced. It looks like it's not going to be easy. So there's 2 little screws under there which you can't really access with a long screwdriver. So we may have to take the board off using those 2 screws, and then be able to access the lights, which are behind those white, inside those white little cradles there. So that'll be near the end as we put the top plate back on. And then you can see all these little daughter boards that are kicking around here. So that might be a power supply board. I have to identify them all and figure out which is which. But if you can see on the underside, there's some caps there. Can I get it? You can see just in there that there's some capacitors in there that need to be swapped out. Probably capacitors there. And we've got some trimmers and more caps in behind. Yeah, so I already cleaned out the, and what you missed was use deoxit and fader lube to clean out the volume, and which one was it? The balance control there. So that's all cleaned out and ready to go. And now I'll just be taking the boards apart one at a time, looking at the caps and seeing if I need to replace them. Probably will, but we'll see what I have on hand. All right, so I just did the just flipped it over, but I did the EQ board. I pulled all the 470 microfarad. I think they were 10 volt capacitors. All of them checked out good, so I put them back in. I didn't have any. I do have some 470 microfarads, but they're these Chinese knockoffs, which when I measured them, they're all out to lunch. So the ones that are in there are actually better. So I kept those, and I swapped out one capacitor on the EQ board just because it was supposed to be a 10 microfarad. It was reading 15, and so I plunked a brand new Nichicon in there. And but otherwise, the board looked good. Everything was in good shape, and I was not having any EQ problems with when I was playing it. So that was just a low-hanging fruit one. So the next board I'm going to work on here is on the other side. So on this side here, similar board that exists there, if you can see it. That was the EQ board, and on this side it's the power supply board. Again, I don't really think the power supply is much of an issue, but given its age and the number of capacitors, that's usually one of the boards where I like to check all the electrolytics just to make sure that they're still within tolerance. If they're not, then I'll swap them out. I also did look at the transistors that are listed on this board, and I do have a vintage where I got from Audio Karma. This is sort of the worst top 11, I think it is. It's actually more than 11. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. About the top 20 offending vintage transistors out there, which are, prone to either shot noise or poor heat dissipation, leakage, thermal stress, and all that, static burst. So that's a handy list to go through, especially in these vintage mid-70s components. I do note that there are some of these ones listed on other boards on this unit, which I will attempt to swap out, depending on how accessible they are. And yeah, so with the power supply board, I shouldn't have to touch any of the transistors. Of course, I'll look it over, make sure there's no heat damage or anything. So I have yet to pull the board and see the other side of it, just to see if there's any signs of heat stress or anything like that. But yeah, we'll give it a good once over. Fuse is intact, in good shape, and we'll see what we can do with this board and give it some more longevity. Okay, next we're going to be taking out this tuning assembly here. So it's basically 4 screws, bang, 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 bang. And then you take this antenna coupler here off, and that's all she wrote. This is an awkward little thing. I think a zip strap would do this better. To get this wire out, I think we're going to snip that. Put a zip strap in there. That way you can get at the connector a little easier. I don't know if it's screwed in there. Doesn't really say. Pull off FO2. So I'm sure that just pulls right out. And it does. It's just a little RCA jack, looks like. Huh. Interesting. Interesting little fitting here. There. Okay, back to hyperlapse. Decided I'm not going to take this assembly. I think I can get at the board I need without having to take this thing, because there's a bunch of things blocking it, and it means disassembling this whole thing, which would probably never get back together again if I attempted that. So what we're going to do is we're going to screw this back on so it doesn't go floppy on me, and then we're not going to mess with it, because the only board where there's caps on it is on this end, and I'm not going to do anything with tuning because I don't have the right equipment. So we'll swap out all the caps on the board. That may cure the popping sounds, or not the popping sounds, just the crackling sounds, and maybe help with the frequency drift. Oh, and I'm dropping stuff all over the place here. I'm letting my workplace get messy here, which is not ever a good thing. So I can see that there's a 470 microfarad 10 volt cap is one of the bigger ones I see on the board there. Ugh, I need some new fingers. I would never make a good surgeon. Loosen these up a bit. There we go. There. So I can get out all these switches here to do the contact cleaner pretty handily, because they have screw mounts on the front. So I'm hoping those boards will pull out. They're not too locked in there. It looks like they've got some slide contacts here to pull out, but we'll see. So I'm looking at this multiplex card here, and one of the leads has not been clipped off here on, looks like a transistor. So I don't think it would have run into any contact problems, but nevertheless, poor workmanship on their part. So we're going to snip that off. And we got a couple of 470 microfarad 10 volts that I don't have replacements for. I do have generic ones, but I don't trust those. They're from China. So I'm making a list here basically of what I need. And then I got some tantalum caps that I may or may not have replacements for. And I think I'm going to just focus on the electrolytics, because that's what I have replacements for. And again, I'm not a big radio guy, so I don't think this one's going to be a real multiplex filter. I don't suspect there's anything wrong with it, but anyway, I'll change out the electrolytics that I can. I'm going to try and get these 470s. I'm going to go to electrical shop today. So I've got a list of those that I'm going to get. And then, yeah, we'll see what else we can do. I've got some other parts I got to get from the power supply board. I need a 470 25 volt. And then I need about 330 25 volts here, I think, for the EQ board. So I'm going to make a list of those as well. So indicator assembly board. Make a parts list for those. There, that completes the multiplex board. More than half of them were way out of tolerance, so I swapped them out. A couple of the smaller ones, like the 2.2 microfarads and the two 1 microfarad capacitors, were actually reading better than the replacements were, so I left them in. So they're obviously haven't been used very much and are in really good tolerance, so what's the point in changing them? So I did pull them and measure them, and you know, rather than using 20% caps, which are probably being replacing 5% caps or whatever, yeah, I said no. Okay, so onward we move. I think the next thing I'm going to start trying to do here, that's just the multiplex board. We've still got these big honking boards back here that I want to tackle. We'll have to figure out how I'm going to do that. I think I might have to take this bar out, which here's a disassembly procedure in the manual for that, so that I can get the back of this and then unscrew these boards and then lift them so I can look at the caps on those. But first, I think what I want to do, this needs to go back in here, or back in here. But first, what I'm going to do, I think, is drop this down, and you can see the screw mounts here for all these switches. So I'm going to see if I can pull those out. These two, the volume and the base, or sorry, the volume and the balance control, I've already deoxed and fader lubed them. So I'm going to do the same thing with the fader lube for the pots and deox it for the switches. And we'll see if we can get some of these switches cleaned up. So the contour, bass, and treble comes out as a module, which is good for me because it makes this whole board, it's the tone control PCB. It exposes all the caps and everything, and I don't have to work on the machine as things are dangling down and everything, which is great. It exposes the potentiometers quite easily, so we can clean those up fairly simply. And then what I'm going to do is go through each of these capacitors here and see how far out of whack they are. And maybe some of these are where my noise issues have been coming from. So glad this is easily accessible like this. And it looks like the switch, so this is actually, there's these two receiver units on the main PCB that it pops into, and what we'll do is we'll clean up these contacts too, just in the sockets that they pop into, just to make sure that those are all clean, because now that I've handled them with my oily fingers, we'll do that just before I reinsert. And yeah, so we can kind of set this thing aside, give us some more working room, and get my trusty cap and transistor tester here accessible. And then I'm going to pull out the cheat sheet here for the tone control PCB, and we will start tackling this bad boy. It looks like we've page 19 in the service manual is the tone control PCB, and there's also a Dolby noise reduction PCB, and this is a holdover of the 70s, when they had anticipated that they would be using Dolby noise reduction on FM. So they tried it, a few radio stations used it and that sort of thing, but for modern purposes, this board will never ever be used, so I'm not even going to bother with that board. What's the point in changing all these capacitors and everything? I guess you could, you know, to be period correct and all that stuff, but quite honestly, nobody transmits FM and Dolby anymore. So that's a button that's on the face of the preamp that will assuredly never get used. So I'm going to just leave that as is. It probably works fine, but anyway, I'm going to spend my efforts on things that actually make a difference. So the tone control PCB, it is signal path stuff, so we'll use the best capacitors that I can find for those, and hopefully we won't change any characteristics or whatever by just doing swap outs. I'm going to try and get well, we will get the same specific specs for each of the caps, and if there's some that I find unavailable, then we can always, revisit that later or whatever, leave the old ones in, as long as they measure good. So I'm going to measure them all anyway. So the other thing I want to check here is the transistors on this. So I just want to make sure none of the transistors are on my problematic transistor list. If they are, then I'd probably swap those out. So 2SC1222, that's not known to be a bad one. 2SA640, no, that's 2SC945, those are, I know, are good. What other transistors? There's not many transistors on this. Well, there's quite a few, but they're all the same type. Let's see, what else do we got here? So that's the Dolby board. I assume this side is the tone control board. Oh yeah, 2SC20, 1222, 2SA640, 945, 945, 640. So there's oodles of them, but they're all good ones. So we're not gonna. I'll probably measure them just to make sure they're all good, but I don't think there's any problematic ones there. So onward. That concludes the tone control board, which is the contour, bass, and treble controls. Did most of the electrolytics. Quite a few of them were out of tolerance, so it's a good thing I changed them. Some of them were really good, in fact, better as the last one. Some of the smaller ones, like the 2.2 microfarads, were all well within tolerance and good shape, so I left them in there. Point in putting something that's got worse values than what's already in there, so that's why I did that. But there's only maybe 4 or 5 caps that I actually left on the board. And that was the very small ones, like 2.2, I think, and maybe a 1 microfarad. Yeah, so the next thing we're going to sort of tackle are the switches here. So the photo logs, the input switches, and the FM switches. I'm not sure if this has a board and with capacitors on it, but we'll open this up, pop that out, and then that exposes the main PCB where I can see a number of, oh yeah, there are some daughter boards on here. So yeah, so we'll start tackling those caps that are in there on the main board, which I can put it up on its side and I can access them from the front. I may not even have to remove the board to do that. This board I've done, this board I've done, FM or the Multiplex board. So we're getting there. We're doing good. I suspect these ones because the FM switch, that was the one that was a bit noisy. So we'll clean those switches up with the oxit, and then we'll also look at those capacitors on those daughter boards there, and you know, we may find some issues there. Alright, now that I've removed this board, there are 2 little boards here, and if you're watching this video to do some work on one of these things, then what I learned here is there's 8 screws on the faceplate here, and they're not all on the outside, but there's 4 long screws and 4 short screws. The long screws, if you pull one out, you can actually get by with keeping 2 in, but if you pull a long screw out, you don't really want to pull them all out because then all these buttons go flying, and I just caught it just before it did that. So you really don't need, they're just extensions and they're all spring loaded so they can go flying all over the place. So I'd recommend keeping the long screws in, and then the whole unit comes out as an assembly. Now I guess if you want to get inside here, all it is just the spring loaded switches here. And by extension, they go to the main switch assembly, which is on the other side here. You may want to get at the front just to spritz some contact cleaner in here, but I think I'm going to try and do it just from the back end here, and I think I can get contact cleaner in those. So there's really no need to disassemble it. There's no caps. There's just a bunch of resistors here. So that's a pretty straightforward thing. That I'll just clean up the contacts. You can see a little bit of, you know, it's not oxidization, but it's just needs to be cleaned up a little bit. You can see some sort of haze on there, just to make sure you got good contacts. And then we'll also clean the contact female ends on the main board. Now that that's opened up, you can actually get in to see some of the main caps that are on the main board. There's not a lot. They're big ones. I see 4, 5, 6 sort of big ones, and only really another 4 small ones. So looking at the back side of this, if I can remove this board here, I think we can get the job done without having to remove that board. Yeah, there's some screws here. We could probably access it that way, but I really don't think we're going to need to. May not have to pull off the backboard here either, but there is a circuit board on the back here, but that's just that's for these RCA jacks. So I don't believe there's any caps on that board at all. So really, that's it. So I think we can, without having to disassemble too far and get too far into the weeds, we may have a good shot at getting this thing done pretty quickly. So we're gonna clean the switches on here. They weren't really particularly noisy, but we'll try and get a shot of deoxit in them, and yeah. I can see some holes in the top of the switches there, so we can get deoxit in there. I think we're good. So let's do that. Yeah, that completes the tape monitor PCB and the function PCB. And I did notice that there are some Mylar caps in here. Very, 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 very small ones. Looked it up, and not too concerned about those. So we're going to leave those in place. They're very, very small values, so I may not even be able to test that low. So with the gear that I got, so we're going to leave it as is. I don't think there's any issues with this, and we're just going to give it a little spritz here of deoxit. Give it a good wipe down, and we'll do the receiving units on the other side. So this isn't the fader lube stuff, which leaves oil. This is the just to get those contacts nice and clean. They are visually they're clean, but let's just make sure. And then we're going to work now on the main PCB and get all those caps swapped out. And then I think there's no other PCBs that I've done that one. And none that really have caps on them. I'm not going to go inside there or there. And I think we're in good shape. And then I'm going to do the bulbs on the front, and then we'll reassemble everything and see how she sounds. Just wanted to show you a little something, and that's what I do on each of these boards. So I take I printed everything out at 11 by 17. That way it's easier to read. Some of these diagrams are really terrible. You have to kind of go and look at the schematics in some cases to figure some of the circuits out and everything. They're almost unreadable. Anyway, they're well printed on the PCBs, so it's not really that much of a concern. But on the bottom here, you'll see that any of the capacitors that I've swapped out, or even measured, pulled out and measured and marked as good, which are these last two ones. You can see all of these are the old values followed by the new values, and then you can sort of poke through it and then know how far out of tolerance a lot of the all of them are. I keep a little bowl here of all the caps that I've removed, and I used to do it by a little baggie for each board, but there's I just basically on this particular one, just because I'm refreshing everything, I just throw everything into the same pot, and that way I've got all the old caps. If anybody, if I ever sell it to somebody, I can show them, here's what was in it before, and you can measure them yourself to verify that, yeah, indeed it needed it. So there you go. So we're going to do the same thing with the main PCB as well. Alright, now that I've completed the recap, I've got everything more or less assembled. I don't have the face plates on and the light indicators, which are part of the faceplate, which I've still got to change some bulbs on. But before I reassemble everything, I just want to make sure I don't have any shorts. So what I've got is a variac hooked up into a dim bulb tester here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, it's plugged into the variac, turn the variac on, turn the power on, start at 0 volts, and then slowly ramp up. Make sure we don't have any shorts, and look for anything that might be cross-wired or backwards, like a capacitor, an electrolytic capacitor, that sort of thing. So here's the bucket of caps that I took out of this one. Many of them were out of tolerance by a significant degree. No outright cap failures that I found, which is a good thing, I guess. Which means that I don't really suspect other components, although I might still have some noisy transistors. Still have to go through all of the transistor lists, and maybe I might have to pull out another board or whatever and see if I have any noisy ones. As I was going along, I was checking, but I didn't do it 100%. So let's give it a whirl, and hopefully it doesn't blow up. Okay, so I'm going to power on, so I'm down at 0. It's just up to 120 volts. So we're going to start at 0, power this on, and then slowly go up. Alright, I've got everything reassembled. Did all the caps on it, and got it plugged into the dim bulb tester. I don't have the faceplate. There's also a light display system that goes on the front faceplate. So I'm not sure if that's tied with being able to power it up. But what I've got is the dim bulb tester, this plugged into it, and I got all the volume down, everything. Not that I'm driving a load or anything like that. And on Augs. And let's see what happens. Nothing. No power. It's not a good sign. So there, I've finished the preamp, and as you can see, lots and lots and lots of electrolytic capacitors changed out. I did deoxit on all of the buttons and controls and potentiometers. Potentiometers I used fader lube just to properly lube them, and deoxit on any of the switches, including the power switch. And I realized that the dim bulb tester does not work with this thing. It doesn't have the current draw to even light a light bulb. So, thinking it was bad, I checked everything out and plugged it in, and lo and behold, I do have power. So interesting. I never would have figured that. Anyway, next, what I did was, and I did that off camera because I forgot to get the video rolling when I changed out the lights on the front panel. So I'm going to go get that, and I'm going to install that, and reassemble everything and do a sound check, and hopefully it works. So yeah, I found 4 burnt out lights, so I changed those. That's good because that's all I had was 4 spare bulbs, and yeah, everything's now in place, and what I can do is hopefully button this together and go do a sound check on the system. So we'll do that, and then and see how she turned out. Well, I keep thinking I'm starting the camera, and for whatever reason the camera just stops, or I forget to push record on it. But anyway, I got the faceplate put back on in this last sequence that I thought I was recording, and we'll put that down just to see if we're getting indicators. I got my power supply here that I was testing my lights with, and I no longer need that, so I'll unplug that, make a spare socket, and we've got the power off. Plug that in, and now we've got lights. Look at that. Holy smokes. That is just amazing. We've got stereo reception without an antenna. Great. Okay, that's working. So now, at least we know the power is working, which is a good thing. So now we're going to do the balance. Put that into center detent. Volume control. Put down to 0. I always do everything to the left. Put the volume control on. That's on. And the bass, treble, and contour buttons. Okay. Make sure everything's centered. Contour, normal. And bass, and put that in neutral. Treble. No, it's not going all the way in. There we go. That's center detail. Oh, this one isn't quite. There we go. Okay, let's try this out and see how it sounds before I put the back on. We'll just set it up in the other room, and then we'll pick it up from there.